Today in this video, we're going to be talking about how to stop thinking about food all the time. So it's the start of the day and then you're already thinking, what should I have for breakfast? What should I have for lunch? What should I have for dinner? Will this fit my calorie allowance? Oh, and sometimes you'll probably find that if you're constantly thinking about food all the time, you might be quite forgetful. Sometimes you're speaking to someone and then you tend to zone out. You tend to think about, okay, how much calories do I have left? You do some calorie maths in your head of your certain allowance. And people might be thinking, oh, Jonathan, why are you always forgetting things? You're quite forgetful. Is everything all right? And you say yes, but in reality, it's the food thoughts that's controlling your life. You're constantly taken over by like food thoughts 24/7. You can't even think straight. You don't even have much motivation to do things because you're so mentally burdened by having food thoughts 24/7 in your life. So you're doing so many mental gymnastics in your head, and then you look ahead of you. There's a friend who never thinks about food, is so successful in life, enjoying memories with friends, and just goes on with life without even thinking about food. And what's the worst thing is that person who doesn't even think about food doesn't even gain weight. So what's going on here? In this video, I'll explain why you're always thinking about food, how to stop thinking about food, and how it'll actually lead to no weight gain if you don't think about food. You heard that right. So in this video, I'm going to be explaining the science of why we have food thoughts 24/7, when it can be a worrying issue, and how to put an end to this food noise permanently. So for us to better understand the solutions to putting an end to 24/7 food thoughts, we need to first of all understand the most unethical experiment done on starvation and hunger called the Minnesota Starvation Experiment. So before we continue on, I'd like to introduce my free 7-day food freedom course, which is completely free in the link in the description, so we can overcome binge eating, overcome emotional eating, improve mindful eating, and put an end to all the food noise, binge eating. So if you want to fast track all your learning, just jump straight to that in the link in the description. So the Minnesota Starvation Experiment was conducted in the 1940s by Dr. Ansel Keys in a way to refeed and rehabilitate prisoners of war who have been malnourished for such a long period of time. But since it's an unethical experiment, and with experiments you should try to not tell people exactly what you're doing. So what they did in the study is that they conducted 3,200 calories to be eaten for 4 months, which is these men's maintenance calories. And it might seem like a lot, but actually 3,200. Remember that these people were very, very active. They're military soldiers and all those kinds of things. They had very high levels of physical activity. They were not as sedentary like we are today, where we have computers. So they have 3,200 calories for 4 months. That's their maintenance. And then they conducted 8 months of half of that, so 1,580 calories. So 8 months of that's basically starvation when they have like half of their calories. Starvation is determined by half of your calories eaten. So they considered this of mostly turnips, breads, and macaroni. So 50% of their maintenance. And what actually happened? So I'm looking at here the physiological effect. So weight loss, the participants lost an average of 25% of their body weight. So sure, that might sound good for some people who want to lose weight, but remember, 25% of your body weight, if you lose weight really, really quickly, most of it's going to be muscle mass. And we often think muscle mass is actually like our arms, our legs, but you need to realize that muscle mass is also our heart, our lungs, our organs. Muscle mass is something that we really, really need to avoid as much as possible. Then we also found out that they actually decreased their basal metabolic rate. So basal metabolic rate, for those who are not aware, is basically your metabolism. When people talk about, oh, I have high metabolism, slow metabolism, that's essentially your basal metabolic rate. So your body, in a nutshell, even if you're in a coma, still needs calories because it needs lots of calories for your brain to think, stay alive, heart to keep on pumping, lungs to keep on transferring oxygen and all those kinds of things. So that's your basal metabolic rate. So they found out that actually decreased, and that does make sense because if you're actually going to reduce your calories, then your body needs to be more efficient with its body use. So that's why you find when you're actually starving yourself or being on a very restricted diet, you start to feel sleepy, you start to lose concentration because your body is actually turning off or down-regulating the knobs, down-regulating as much as possible. It's not going to be using 100% brain power because why would it when it's starved? It's not very efficient. I need to turn down the knob, save as much brain power as much as possible. So that's why basal metabolic rate actually decreases. And then what they found with their physical health, which is actually the most important thing I found, is that they had severe physical weakness and fatigue. Remember, I want you to think right now, as I'm telling you all of these things, when you jump on restrictive diets or jump on, most of the time, diets which are very, very low in calories, are you finding yourself in any of these symptoms which the people in the Minnesota starvation experiment are experiencing? So severe physical weakness and fatigue, then reduced body temperature, feeling really cold, decreased in heart rate. So they might have this thing called bradycardia, which is slowing down the heart rate, development of edema, which is fluid overload, like puffy feet most of the time, puffy hands, which is a sign of heart failure. And then they might have like gastrointestinal issues, bloating, pain, discomfort, loose stools, constipation, maybe even like nausea, vomiting, all those kinds of things. So now let's move on to the psychological symptoms. And remember, see if you could find yourself in any of these. So they had decreased cognitive function, they had impaired concentration and a reduced attention span. They also had decreased comprehension and judgment. They weren't able to think of making the right decisions. Sometimes they'd make quite silly decisions. They had difficulty with memory, with simple tasks such as like memorizing what's going on, what happened like few days before, what's going to happen in the calendar a few days after, what plans do I have made with the wife, with the kids, and all those kinds of things. They also had emotional changes, so increased emotional distress and depression. So this is where sometimes people might be saying like, oh, I feel really hangry if I don't eat. Oftentimes it's because it's true. You feel hungry and you feel angry, increased emotional distress, heightened irritability and mood swings, apathy and loss of interest in activities that you once enjoyed. So in the past you might be thinking, okay, I really enjoyed going to the gym, I really enjoy like knitting or going for walks with friends. Now you just simply have no motivation. You have like the syndrome where you just don't feel motivated to do anything. You have like a development of depression. You feel like everything's just boring now. All you want to do is just simply eat food. Food is your life. Food revolves around your life. Your life doesn't revolve around food. Then they have like obsessive behavior. So they have preoccupation with food, constantly thinking about food, meal planning, calories, ritualistic eating behaviors, and food hoarding. They find people often eat from trash cans from this experiment. They started to literally go crazy around food. They started to have like mania. They had fascination with food-related topics such as cookbooks and recipes. So you can see how these psychological and physiological changes are actually normal. It's not because you're struggling with willpower, and the reason why you're thinking about food all the time is not because it's a good thing. It's not a good thing. You shouldn't be thinking about food all the time. If you're on a diet or you're constantly like doing things right, quote unquote, doing things right, then you shouldn't be thinking about food. That's why they say if you're on a restrictive diet, you think about food more because you're heavily focused. No, that's not true. It's because you're not hustling. It's because your body's thinking it's in a life or death situation. It's a famine going on, your body thinks. So that's not normal. And what they also found from the study is, which is going to be really interesting, is that if you're a dietitian, you'd be very aware of this. It's what's called refeeding syndrome. So these patients had refeeding syndrome. So after a period of long starvation, then they lost a large amount of body weight. When they reintroduced foods, they had a shift in electrolytes, potassium, phosphate, and magnesium. And what's worrying about this is that when you have a shift in electrolytes after reintroducing food, after a long period of not eating, or a period of starvation, or a period of large amount of weight loss, then this could lead to a shift of potassium. And one thing about potassium is it regulates your muscle contractions. So if you have a quick shift in potassium after eating a buffet of food, after being so starved, then that could lead to a heart failure. It could lead to a heart attack because it's quite a large amount of shock to the body. And how it actually works is that after being completely depleted of nutrients, there's no nutrients in your blood, there's no electrolytes or very little electrolytes in your blood, you're completely depleted of potassium, phosphate, and magnesium. And then when you eat a large amount of food, especially carbohydrates, that stimulates insulin, so that transfers all the depleted already potassium, phosphate, and magnesium into the cells, so you're even more depleted. So that can lead to a dangerous shift of electrolytes. You're completely depleted and it could be life-threatening. So what am I trying to say here? Try not to starve yourself, because you're going to be thinking about food 24/7. Try not to starve yourself, because you're gonna have like physical effects, weakness, a loss of memory, poor cognitive functioning. You can't even think straight. And try not to reintroduce food really, really quickly, which many people do when they have a binge eating episode. So they restrict and binge, restrict and binge, and the more you're in this binge restrict cycle, restrict, then you binge eat, then feel guilty, and so you restrict, binge eat. It's this never-ending cycle of restricting, binging, and then it's gonna cause more psychological pain, lower mood, lower self-esteem, and also physical pain. You're putting yourself at a risk of refeeding syndrome, so you're gonna have like heart pain. So let's talk about where attention goes, power goes. So if you give attention to food, then you're constantly thinking about food. If you give attention to diets, you're going to be constantly thinking about diets. So let's talk about this analogy to really bring this home. So let's give this analogy of a teenager in high school studying physics. Or when I was a teenager studying physics, I didn't really care about physics. I thought, let's get us over with. It's not that important. Yeah, the theory of relativity and the balls falling from the sky, gravity, blah, blah, blah. Let's get it over with. It's not that interesting. But if you're in university and your college degree or your university degree to study physics, then wherever you go, you're going to be thinking about physics. You're going to be thinking about, oh yeah, the gravity, let's say, I'm just thinking about anything. I'm not that good at physics, but you know, like the gravity and the ability of a bee to fly when its wings are so small. That's really, really interesting. Oh, the sun, the stars, the gravity of the birds flying, and these raindrops falling from the earth. You see literally everything for its physics. So wherever you go, you see physics. Now let's take this up a notch. So let's say you're at a doctorate level, you're at a PhD degree. Literally everything you do, from the breath in the air of me talking, me moving my hands, literally everything you see is physics. So if you bring this back to food, if you're constantly thinking about food 24/7, diets, time, restricted feeding, fasting, what diet to be on, carnivore, keto, calorie counting, you see everything as a calorie, macros, fats, carbs, protein, fiber, and all those kinds of things, you're constantly going to be thinking about food because you're probably at a PhD level, a doctorate level of calorie counting. So how can you unlearn all of these? How can you unlearn calorie counting? Well, the truth is, you can't unlearn calorie counting because, like physics, for example, with the analogy, it's a skill. But what you can do is you can downregulate this anxiety. So if you look back to the Minnesota starvation experiment and you can look to yourself, why am I feeling irritable? Why am I feeling weak? Why am I feeling that I have to constantly think about food all the time? If we look back at the Minnesota starvation experiment and look it back to ourselves, then we need to realize that we're starving ourselves, so we're eating 50% or less of what our body needs. We're telling our body there's no food around. So what we can do is to tell our body there is food regularly. So I would say eat at your maintenance. Sure, you're not gonna lose weight. You might gain a little bit of weight, or you might like stabilize your weight, but it's important to tell your body that there's food around. Stabilize yourself before you ever even think about putting yourself in weight loss. So what this looks like is to eat 3 regular meals and 2 to 3 snacks in between. To tell your body there's food regularly, frequency and quantity. So eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner with snacks in between. Eat every 3 to 4 hours. And you might be thinking, oh Jonathan, that's a lot of food. But remember, if you're binging and restricting, you have portion distortion. You don't really know what actually a normal portion looks like. It's feast or famine. So try to make yourself 8 out of 10 full. Eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner with snacks in between. And keep at it until your binge eating episodes disappear. And then when your binge eating episodes disappear, that's when you truly know that your body has stabilized. And then you're not at a starvation state. So the reason why I'm telling you to be 8 out of 10 full, so 10 out of 10 is Christmas dinner full, and 0 out of 10 is nauseously hungry, you could eat a bear. 8 out of 10 is so that you're not reliant on a calorie number, you're not reliant on calorie counting to determine when you should stop or when you should start eating. When you should stop and start eating should be determined by how comfortably full you are. So try to be 8 out of 10 full. And then this is called mechanical eating. So you're mechanically eating to restore your hunger cues. Tell your body like food is available and put an end to binge eating episodes. And the reason why I want you to eat regular meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner with snacks in between, is to re-regulate your blood sugar and re-regulate your insulin levels. The reason why I'm telling you to eat regular meals might sound counterintuitive, like, oh, if I'm eating regular meals, I'm going to be thinking about food much more. But it doesn't work that way. If you restrict yourself, your body has 100 reasons to eat regularly. But if you're eating regular meals, your body will have probably like 1 or 2 reasons to think about food. And most of those reasons are because you're eating the food right now. There's no starvation state. There's no psychological reason to think about food. You're putting all the reasons to think about food in the bin, essentially. And if you're releasing insulin, aka eating meals little and often, then your blood sugar levels are stabilized and you're not having severe rises and crashes in blood sugar. So you're not going to be thinking about food. Your body's not going to be thinking, I need sugar, or too much sugar, I'm just eating regular meals. So in a nutshell, if you're constantly thinking about food, I want you to always remember back to the Minnesota starvation experiment. Am I under eating calories? Am I avoiding food as much as possible? Am I irritable or constantly angry or constantly thinking about food? How can I undo these effects of starvation? So I'm not going to say that the food noise will completely disappear. The food noise will massively decrease because you're giving your body all the reasons to not think about food. Well, if I'm eating regularly, why am I going to think about food? There's no reason to think about food. If I'm in maintenance calories, why am I needing to think about food? Because there's no starvation going on. And if you want to choose to lose weight afterwards, then you can choose to lose weight, but make sure that your binge eating episodes go to 0. I'd say stop binging at least for 2 weeks. And if you go for 2 weeks and longer without having any binge eating episodes, then you can choose to lose weight. But make sure that you're maybe in 300 or 500 max of a calorie deficit. Any more than that is going to trigger intense psychological thoughts, physical thoughts about food and much more. You're going to be at a starved state. So if you really enjoy this video, I highly recommend that you check this one on why you shouldn't be calling foods good and bad and how it actually can lead you to binge eat and wreck your self-esteem. So check that video out and I'll see you there.